Hi everyone, my name is Toan Lam and I'm super excited today to introduce you to Tony Bravo, San Francisco Chronicle arts and culture columnist, to talk about Bruce Lee's style. And first and foremost, thank you so much for joining us, Tony Bravo. Do people, I love the name Tony Bravo, so I want to say it together. Do people always say Tony Bravo all at once?
Quite frequently, and I always tell them that I'm the heir to the Andy Cohen housewives fortune.
Okay, okay.
I used to say I'm like it's the thing that people yell at the end of an opera, but more people know those housewives than they know high culture at this point.
I love that. Well, I'm a super big fan of yours and Bruce Lee, so I'm just grateful that you are able to share some of your style expertise, your sass. Can I say sass in a good way? You know what I mean?
Sure.
Uh,
I'm also excited to talk about Bruce Lee. I first encountered Bruce Lee as a kid. My dad was a big Bruce Lee fan. He would have been a young teenager when Bruce Lee was still making films. We watched a lot of Green Hornet together, and it's not often that people ask me about action and martial arts film stars in the fashion realm.
yeah. So when you were a kid, can you bring me back to that time when you first saw Bruce Lee and what you thought about him?
I'm gonna. My dad is definitely the super fan. I will say that the Green Hornet was the thing that really sticks out the most to me. The style that it wasn't just the suit and the uniform and the cap and the mask that he wore as Kato. It was the way that he wore them. It's not the outfit quite frequently. It is the person wearing it. It is the way they carry themselves in it. He
Yeah.
made suiting look as comfortable, as flexible for movement, as easy to do a kick in as your gym shorts or a gi. It I will never get over just this feeling of how cool it was that he could take this very formal structured garment and make it into an action hero outfit.
Oh yeah, I know, especially with the yellow and black jumpsuit that we'll talk about later. But
Right.
yeah, I too have been super inspired by Bruce Lee, and that's why I wanted to join this project. Because in the fall of 2021, the Chinese Historical Society of America, also known as CHSA, will present a new major exhibition in Bruce Lee's hometown, San Francisco, California, in Chinatown. It's going to be called the "We Are Bruce Lee Under the Sky One Family" exhibit, and Bruce Lee means so much to me on so many levels. I tell people personally, professionally, spiritually, and even style wise. Um, as an Asian American man, to see him be an action hero, to be, can I say that here? Anyway, I'll bleep that out. But just to just be so out of the box, and like you said, so comfortable in his own style, made me think about, wow, like growing up in South Sac, my parents are Asian, so they were like, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an engineer. And I wanted to tell stories and talk to people to inspire people to be better and do better for a living, right? And I think it's when I watched him and say, wow, this guy who looks like me, who's really outside of the box in terms of back in the 70s when you saw him in these martial arts movies and such. uh, you know he was just a breath of fresh air. And in terms of like not only having his own style and inspiring martial artists all across many different martial arts platforms, but in having his own unique style. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit first. I love that you zoomed right into what style truly means. And for me, style means that it's a way you wear things, right? Because two people
Yeah,
can wear the
absolutely.
same garment, but still carry it differently. It's the swag. It's the way your energy, how comfortable you are. So, what does style, first and foremost, mean to you?
Well, I think you hit on it. It's not what you're wearing, it's how you wear it. Sometimes it's whether you're wearing the clothes or the clothes are wearing you.
Mm.
Bruce Lee is a man that in his personal life and candid photos and photos that we see of him out in public and also on screen, he was the one wearing the clothes. Something like the Kato outfit or like the iconic jumpsuit, those are pieces that could have easily overwhelmed another actor, and he absolutely owned them.
Yeah, and you're talking about the yellow and black tracksuit, right?
Yeah,
Um, yeah, that he became iconic for and wearing it in the Game of Death, which was not finished because he had passed away while he was making it. But he was so aware of his sort of like on-screen presence and knowing how camera angles were, because obviously he was the vision behind it and in front of the screen for the game of death. In terms of like the actual, let's talk about style first. Like, what did you think about this yellow and black suit?
I mean, it's iconic. I don't use that word. I try not to overuse that word when talking about aesthetic things, when talking about art, when talking about fashion or movies. But one of the easiest ways to know whether something has made a mark is to see whether or not it's been imitated. And everybody has imitated that yellow and black suit. It's certainly, it showed up in Tarantino's Kill Bill, which showed that it could cross the gender lines. It's shown up in variations across many athletic retailers over the years. And it's so distinctive because of that color, because of the color combination. It immediately brings to mind the agility and the sort of impossible flight of the bumblebee. It brings to mind things like classic race cars. I mean, he is kind of a race car in that look. He's got all the speed, he's got all the power of an engine. The way that he is able to highlight his movements through that bold color, I think is phenomenal. When I think of Bruce Lee behind the camera and how he thought of himself in front of the camera, I actually think the closest comparison that I can make in my knowledge is to Gene Kelly, who was very conscious of how the camera moved, what he was wearing, how his feet were highlighted, how his movements looked in a certain garment. I think Bruce Lee absolutely comes from that same kind of DNA.
Oh, I love it. And wait, so can I ask you who wore it better in Kill Bill, Uma Thurman or Bruce Lee? Just kidding, you don't have to answer that.
I think Bruce Lee was the original, and I certainly know that Tarantino has a fraught relationship right now with the legacy of Bruce Lee, and I hope I wasn't bringing up a taboo topic.
It's all good. You know what they say is often imitated, never duplicated, right?
Absolutely.
So how would you describe Bruce Lee's style? I would love to know from somebody of your expertise and somebody that I just like adore your style.
I think that he was really the innovator of something that I would call martial arts chic.
Ooh.
It was a combination of those athletic pieces. There's not just the yellow tracksuit, there was a red tracksuit that was associated with them, I think on screen and off. It's the idea of mixing kind of more formal Western pieces, things like the Kato suiting, like regular late 60s, early 70s suiting, which goes from being very slim and very sort of English inspired, being a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more bohemian. The collars are spread a little bit further. We see a little bit more skin. It's that combination of all those elements though. Even things like thinking about his classic white undershirt, that has become iconic in its own right. I think as much as the yellow tracksuit.
Yeah.
What really impresses me though is actually something that is almost anti-fashion. His image shirtless is not just a celebration of his own, incredible athletic body, but it was probably very revolutionary in the time that it came about for a man of color, for an Asian American man to be seen as not only a powerful symbol with those incredible muscles and that really tapered torso and all of the abs, the many, many abs, but to be, sexy. People of color did not get the benefit of being sexy without being sexualized sometimes in ways that were through the white gaze and that were very pejorative. There's nothing pejorative about looking at a shirtless Bruce Lee. I think that to those inclined towards men, there's certainly a lot of sexuality there.
Yeah.
And to people that just want to admire somebody whose body is an instrument and a tool. There you go. I mean, you could hammer nails with him. He's very hard.
Oh, I love that. And you know what? You hit on a point that just pierced my heart, because you talked about something that is not often talked about in terms of transcending stereotypes. Really, he bridged the Eastern and Western world. And back in the 70s, remember, who could forget Breakfast at Tiffany's, right? Where
that was, God, I'm happy and dismayed that you brought that up, because it's when you were talking about the box that Asian American public personalities were in at the time. I mean, it's not even a box for Asian Americans in certain parts of the culture. That is a white man playing Japanese.
Oh.
I mean, Bruce Lee maybe, you know, exploded the box that wasn't even there. He went so far beyond what the media expectation was.
Yeah, you know, when I was a kid, I remember watching Asian, you know, caricatures often played by white people, you know, like, you know, 70s and even into the 80s, right? And it was just so refreshing and just like jaw-dropping to see somebody that is handsome instead of, you know, somebody that is a caricature with like buck teeth and angry and like broken English. I mean, he was sort of like this suave, sexy, right?
He's kind of James Bond in some ways. The way that he uses suiting, the way that he is active in suiting and looks as comfortable drawing a punch in a tailored jacket as he does when he's shirtless, I think is one of the greatest tropes that he helps invent as an action star.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I love the guy. He was known for the white Henleys too. I mean, from being shirtless to the white Henley to the yellow and black jumpsuit to like, oh, it's just, you know, there's so many ways that I felt like was this, might I say, fashion icon, right?
There's something there for everybody, like you pointed out. There's a lot of diversity with the kind of looks that he did. So if you're not necessarily somebody that's going to do the white Henley, like maybe you're more of a tracksuit person. If you're not a tracksuit person, you can absolutely do a cap and a little mask and be Kato for Halloween. There's a lot of diversity there in the types of looks that he did. And if you have the body for it, you know, maybe going shirtless is an homage.
Work it.
If you feel that you have the body for it, if you're comfortable for it, that can be another homage to Bruce, being comfortable with your form.
Yeah. Oh, I love that you said that. And yeah, I mean, even people, it transcended just the Asian Americans too. I mean, like, look at modern day, bless his heart, the late, like Kobe Bryant, right? He had one of his shoes, you know, turned into like the famous yellow and black color of the tracksuit. And I thought that was pretty, you know, amazing how like you see kind of like a, you know, a rise in his popularity now. But before we even go there, I wanted to ask you, back in the 70s, what do you think, or I mean, this is all kind of conjecture just based on your expertise. But
it was not around in the 70s.
well, in terms of you studying, you know, and interviewing people of that era. So what do you think, or, you know, what do you think about his, you know, his influences in fashion?
I think it's really interesting that the 70s become an era that is really when sort of the bohemian part of the 60s fully takes off. You see this great crisscross lace shirts on him that are very much kind of a remnant of kind of a certain Woodstock style. You see the more relaxed suiting. You see the spread collars. I think that he embodies that with as much ease as he embodies the slimmer, more English lines of suiting that are very evocative of the 60s. There's also just sort of a comfort level, I think, with his sexuality and the way that he presented himself in clothes. Some of those pants are definitely designed to show off his form. The spread collars, again, the crisscross shirts. You see a fair amount of chest in those. And the 70s were a moment when men started to feel comfortable again with a certain type of peacocking, with a certain type of sexual freedom. I mean, this is a moment where the sexual revolution is still very much in full swing. And it's a moment where men are also kind of taking some of that freedom and applying it to how they express themselves.
Essentially, I really believe that fashion and style is really about how you show yourself to the world. That's why I think it's so important that when you wear a ring or a shirt or whatever, you know, I'm actually trying to do this whole, I'm not trying to be Bruce Lee here, or compare myself, but the whole, you know, athletic chic, as you say, with this sweatshirt that's a little bit more.
Yeah, and the high contrast black and white, that's a good look.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so we have
to talk about the haircut. I mean, that Bruce Lee's haircut, I think, is equally as iconic as anything else that he did in fashion. And it's really interesting if you stop and kind of analyze the slightly longer in the back, softer bang, a little bit on the sides look that I think we think of as the signature. It's actually a slightly feminine haircut. It's not like 100% different from maybe kind of what Liza Minnelli or Pixie Cut is kind of known to be. Farrah Fawcett was longer. It was more of a feathered look. This is maybe almost Dorothy Hamill-ish. It really is something that I think when you see it on a man, especially an Asian American, an Asian man, somebody with dark hair, I think it's immediately evocative of Bruce Lee. And it's not necessarily a look that I think every man wants to step into, but he absolutely, I think, made it a style signature of his own. But speaking of the sunglasses, by the way, I was going through my closet figuring out what the most Bruce Lee item I had was. And I probably have a lot of sunglasses that could easily fall into the Bruce Lee category. He liked this kind of aviator line up top. He did the bigger hard shell glasses frequently. And these are from this season. I mean, this is a designer that I think is clearly still working within the milieu of the 70s, and maybe it's even a little bit of a call out to Bruce Lee.
Oh, I love that you did that, because I was trying to think about what's the most Bruce Lee thing that I could wear. So I love this. I also wanted to ask you, what is the brand of the glasses? Because I have a pair of Gucci glasses that look like that too.
Those are Tom Ford.
Oh, Tom Ford. Yeah, because mine were, I think, from like 5-6 years ago. And again, it's still like classic, right?
They've become perennial pieces. I think that sort of the era that we think of as Bruce Lee's heyday, late 60s, early 70s, it's just become a part of the ongoing fashion conversation. We certainly have cycles of retro where we're interested in more specific moments within those decades than others, but that particular chunk of time, I think, is just sort of entered into eternal good taste and will be, I think that people will continue to revisit it in the fashion industry.
Oh, that's now, speaking about the future and forward thinking in terms of fashion, why was Bruce Lee's style so influential just so many generations later, do you think?
You know, the biggest answer, the biggest reason I can give for that is that I think Bruce Lee is a icon fashion-wise that's really accessible to men that might not be comfortable otherwise talking about fashion for whatever weird gendered associations they have around fashion being feminine or not being a sufficiently masculine pursuit. Nobody is going to doubt Bruce Lee's either masculinity, his physical strength, and he looked as good and in clothing and used clothing as effectively as people that sort of train themselves to become fashion icons. There are people that really consciously follow fashion and try and use it in the development of their public persona, for whom it's really more of a cornerstone. For Bruce Lee, I think it's a nice kind of footnote at times. That's not to diminish his impacts on style, but most of us, the first thing we're going to think of when we think of Bruce Lee is the martial arts, is the film. If you take a moment though, and you look at something through a style lens, through an aesthetic lens, you see that there is an impact there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think going back to his keen sense of fashion and just awareness of who he was and how he wanted to show himself to the world, he definitely wore the clothes. Right.
A mix of East and West that you talked about too. I think that that's fascinating that he not only existed as a bridge cinematically between those worlds, but in the way that he mixed elements from both cultures.
And that's what that's why I'm so excited about this exhibit opening at CHSA in San Francisco's Chinatown the fall of next year, because what it's going to do is, gosh, there's so many layers peeled back. I love layering clothes too, just like I love layering interior design. And I love your backdrop, by the way, super fabulous. But just there, you can peel back the different layers with the different generations. When you I want to take my younger niece and nephew, who's 14 and 12, to the exhibit to kind of share Bruce Lee's story. And like you said, he was an icon in so many ways, in martial arts and in Hollywood and an Asian American man, but also it's seldom talked about, his sense of style and finesse and who he was. So I can sit here and talk to you all day about style and fashion. And I just thank you, Tony, so much for your time today. And again, Tony Bravo, San Francisco Chronicle's art and culture columnist. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I am really excited that Bruce Lee is returning home to San Francisco next year.
Yeah, and I'm also, again, so excited that we talked about the East, the West, the male energy, the female energy, the athletic, the suave, the shirt, the no shirt. And so
there's actually one thing we haven't touched on, if we have a quick minute, that
Sure.
I would love to just get in.
Yes.
I also think it's interesting to consider Brandon Lee's style legacy in there. They both have two very distinctive, very different impacts in fashion. We've talked about all of Bruce Lee's. Brandon's style signature, I think, is his role as the Crow. That's not only his sort of most well-known movie, but that in itself is an iconic look. And it's not often that within two generations like that in a family, you get two performers, two people that have such strong signature aesthetics that continue to reverberate in the culture. I think that Brandon also reverberates just like Bruce does.
Wow. I mean, I love that we were talking about the generations to come and you backtrack a little bit and move forward a little bit in this like brilliant way. And then talking about, about Brandon style. Can you just talk a little bit about how they were similar and different?
I mean, I think in films other than The Crow, kind of more conventional martial arts movies, you see a lot of the same kind of gi influenced pants or a lot of shirtlessness. I remember a lot of shirtless Brandon Lee movies when I was a kid.
So do I.
And that look that he has in The Crow, that kind of combination of superhero and gothic, is maybe the equivalent to the yellow and black tracksuit for Brandon. It's athletic. It sort of transcends what we might immediately associate with martial arts. It's almost like a superhero. And I mean, back in the before times prior to COVID, I feel like there was never a Halloween party that I went to where there wasn't at least one guy or sometimes a woman dressed as Brandon Lee as the Crow with the white face and the very distinctive makeup and the black look and underneath. So, you could have a Halloween party where you could see, Bruce and Brandon in theory. The style legacy is that strong.
Wow. And even today, I mean, again, somebody that can, they both just wear the clothes so well.
They wear the clothes don't wear them.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. I can talk to you about Brandon Lee in a whole nother episode because I just love watching him and seeing. I never thought about him in terms of the influences that he had from his father, but you're right. I mean, now I could see the classic style. Some of his in The Crow, it's more avant-garde, but yet modern, but yet athletic. There's so many different layers that just are so interesting.
That's what makes an icon, right?
Yes, exactly. And thank you, Mr. Icon yourself. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your sense of style. Thank you so much, Tony. And we also wanted to say a thank you to Shannon Lee and the Bruce Lee Family Company for allowing us to use the images that we're going to be showing here and for their support on the exhibition in San Francisco Bay Area. You can follow them on Instagram at Bruce Lee. And is there somewhere where we can follow you, Tony, on social?
At Tony Bravo SF on Instagram and Twitter.
Perfect. And I'd also like to thank you everyone for watching today. You can also support the exhibit as well and join the Bruce Lee party. Visit wearebrucelee.org and please follow us on social. Tony, thank you.
Thanks for having me.